はい。ただいま、ジャパニーズリストリームでは、アニメスピードランフェスティバル2025の公認日本語ミラー配信を行っております。続いてのタイトルは、アストロボーイアニメパネル by スコット・ウェスコットでございます。こちらは解説の方はいらっしゃら今んとこ応募は出るかな、来てないですね。ので、有識者の方、コメントいただけると大変助かるんですけれども、まあ、鉄アトム、アストロボーイは鉄アトムですね。だと思いますが、アストロボーイという確か日本での英題はマイティアトムなんですけど、確か、英題アメリカというか、海外での名前はアストロボーイという表記なので、おそらく。ただ、なんか、トークショーなんじゃないかな。トークショーと、いや、トークセッションか何か、パネルってことは何か、ゲーム、カテゴリー表記がないので、もしかしたらゲームじゃなくて何かの企画なんじゃないかな。取りまして。
Times changed overnight. We'll buy back the memories, but it's overpriced. Live life to the fullest, get a world my regards. In charge when you plan it, they abandon the stars, my God. Universe I use as a canvas. Paint a masterpiece when I release the bandage. Concealing the scars, my pain in these paint strokes. Got a lot to say, never leave blank notes. No, these ain't quotes and Instagram posts. These are words for your spirit. You hear it, I turn ghosts into flash. Shaman King with a splash of ghost dad. They can't believe that a human had wrote that. Jazz on holidays, Billy was the soundtrack. To match the long nights, inspiration, I found that. Can't get around that. They trying to box you in. When you make a mistake, you in the pen. No whiteout. So love, I write about. All that other crap, I don't know what the hype.
ちょっとお時間ありそうなので、改めまして、こちら、アニメスピードランフェスティバル2025、こちらジャパニーズリストリームでは、現在公認日本語ミラー配信を行っております。このイベントはスピードゲーミングのチャンネルで行われているオンラインの RTA イベントとなっております。漫画、アニメが好きな RTA 奏者たちによるコミュニティ、アニメスピードランズのコミュニティイベントで、日本チームとアメリカチームの2チームで各運営されております。アニメと RTA でつながる世界がここにある。イベントは5月17日、昨日の土曜日ですね、の朝10時頃から開始し、本日18日の午後3時頃、一応午後3時頃まで昼夜雇わず行われます。スケジュールをご確認の上、ぜひ最後までお楽しみください。なんですけれども、My peace keeps growing by the day. Slumber in the field of dreams. My conscience lay on the dock of the bay, watching the world move beneath me. Start gazing with love, speak easy. Start gazing with love, speak easy. Start gazing with love. 現在若干押し進行になっておりまして、もしかしたら夕方、確か18時頃まで続くかも。このままの状況だと。な感じでございます。そして、 アニメスピードランフェスティバル終了後、少し休憩挟みまして、今日の深夜っていうか日付変わりまして、5月19日午前2時30分頃から RPG リミットブレイク2025の日本語ミラー配信も始まる予定でございます。こちらはこちらもお楽しみにいたところで、
And as I look back, it seems so minuscule. Little did I know was preparing for the interview. Now I'm well suited, had to cut ties with the loose ends. Good disguise though. Many days we spent trying to cuff links. The beauty of life is the rough things are only momentary. Yeah, vital to development. So technically the pain's relevant. If I could be president, I wouldn't be. I'd throw a jacket on and peace out. I heard of me.But I got a job in mind involving rhymes. Want to break the hourglass just to stall the time. I would write lines in class to sprawl the mind of my peers. Well, the Southern draw yearning for years to get a deal. Ramen noodles for meals. Now I'm here with a fresh outfit. This how it feels, man. First, let me pull my pants up. Shirt on, let me see you put your hands up. Stone fools thought that I was gonna lose. Now you can kick rocks, let me lace my shoes on. Can't forget about the backpack and my hat flying to the moon and my rat pack bow tie. Oh my, these are my interviews coming into the view from the blue sky. Cause I'm ready for the interview. I've been prepping for the interview. Look, sometimes life shift changes the interview. So be ready for the interview.Why you butting in my business? One of my foster moms was a witness. She said paradise promised when we leave Earth, but you gotta pay a fee first. I was like, wait, what? Nah, I ain't chill with that. Years later, grandma said, deal with that. She was a Christian, told me, listen, God got a plan for you, but you gotta stop playing. Buckle up, all this bell to be your best friend. I smile now, but when the sun sets in and the moon lights my path, I flash back. So when I had to fight the laugh, this my career now, like the tag. First, let me pull my pants up. Shirt on, let me see you put your hands up. Stone fools thought that I was gonna lose. Now you can kick rocks, let me lace my shoes on. Can't forget about the backpack and my hat flying to the moon and my rat pack bow tie. Oh my, these are my interviews coming into the view from the blue sky. Cause I'm ready for the interview.I've been prepping for the interview. Look, sometimes life shift changes the interview. So be ready for the interview.
こちらの、そうですね、こちらのアストロボーイアニメパネルの後はキッズステーションアンパンマン2、アンパンマンと大冒険、ドラゴンボール3、悟空伝、ディフィートこれマージョンリアかな。そして ASF2025 イベントプレビューを挟みまして、おそらくこれはボーナス枠になるのかと思いますが、ボーナスなんかと思いますが、ドラゴンボールスティー悟空伝 2% と続いています。こちらの後もいくつか作品が続いていく形になるんじゃないかと。アンパンマン2、ドラゴンボール3、そしてアンパンマン2とドラゴンボール3悟空伝の両カテゴリーにつきましては、日本人奏者のコットンさんが出走される予定でございます。また、そうですね、ドラゴンボール3悟空伝 2% の後のこちらもボーナスゲームになります。プリプリちーちゃんプリプリレコルームがあるんですけれども、こちらは昨日見るもレポンを走られた貫勝さんが出走予定でございます。1分どころか3秒で終わるカテゴリーがどういうこと？本当なの3秒とはちょっと調べますね。
our way out of here, leaving our worries and our troubles in the atmosphere. Don't nothing matter here except what lies in the beyond. Over infinity we cross on this trip into the stars. Yeah. Floating just miles in the distance, I already don't see my own. A life that was hectic is put in perspective from one glance at these stars alone.
2% の方ですかね。
The weight of the world is to the space that holds it, and why sometimes I have it placed on my shoulders. Been looking forward to leaving this orbit, and with it what's bringing me down.
こちら。そうですね。ドラゴンボールの 2% がそれです。このボーナスランのそこについては詳しく解説しますと津田さんがコメントされておりますね。ここに有識者の方がいらっしゃるのはありがたい。なんだとなんですってなんですって今回のマジュニアでもカセット抜きますと解説3秒 RTA なんかとんでもないカテゴリーなんですかね 2% は。なんだなんだ
It takes to break the cycle and bring us together through rhythms. So like Michael said, it don't matter if you're black or white. Same goes for blue or red, green. We all alike in a way. So let us keep grooving in harmony. Hat with a backpack, feeling like a pharmacy. Prescribe what you need, feel alive through these beats. Survive though we bleed, you can recognize creed. Kept punching, I was training right into range. Battle scars in the brain, still I maintain. And do my thing while the melody serenades the soul. We were made to be gold. Let the trumpets blow while the stars glow. Colder than Fargo, clouds my only cargo. Granddad still call me Morrow. I'ma dance through the sorrow. Today's my tomorrow.
なんかいろいろと 2% っていうところでありますが。
My family limbo, this a fourth dimension tempo. Time for the simple to take a back seat, no taxi. Spiritually, I'll give you a lift if you ask me. Crafty tunes involving croons, revolving moons. Automobile, call me soon. But for now, I'ma jam with my ace to these intergalactic grooves. I don't wanna waste time, rhythm around to the bass and the drums. Sprung from these trumpets in space. Trumpets in space. Trumpets in space. Yeah, trumpets in space. Yeah.
現在はアストロボーイアニメパネルのセットアップ中になりますかね、これは。ちょっと準備にお時間をいただいているようで、少々お待ちいただけたらと。ここまでアニメスピードランということで、いろんなアニメの作品がいろんなアニメや漫画原作のタイトルが披露されていたわけなんですけれども、
yes, home is where the heart is. We address problems of the world, the stress, feel I need the rest. Wake up and document it, a musical PDF, yes. Finding balance is a challenge, it seems, but giving up is not admissible. A pivotal theme in my aria, we're fighting insomnia, our isolation away from revamping Doria. Love, these smooth jazz tunes, easy to bend to. The cool breeze chills my mental, I like that. Everything reveals in the light. Live life, we ain't living it right. Tunes up in the fast lane. Staying true to my last name. Pharaoh, aiming for stars. Slow motion like Max Payne. I never changed when the cash came. Tell Anubis I'm alive, still blue. Spend my all, now the nudist. Thought you knew this. This beat got a classic vibe. I like that. Just relax your mind. One time. Seeking you'll find the prize. Keep your eyes on the friendly sky. That's right. Less is more. Empathize with your eyes on the friendly sky. Sit back and relax your mind. Keep your eyes on the friendly skies.
この中で現行機でも遊べるタイトルって何かあるのかな。ガンダムブレイカーとかは遊べるかもしれない。さあ、PC って書いてあるタイトルとかは多分現行機でも遊べそうな感じ。何かスイッチオンラインとかで配信されているタイトルとかはこの中にあるんでしょうかね。
Ahead of my time, I wrote this next week. This beat got a classic vibe, I like that. Just relax your mind. Seeking you'll find the prize. Keep your eyes on the friendly sky. That's right. Less is more. Empathize with your eyes on the friendly sky. Sit back and relax your mind. Keep your eyes on the friendly skies.
おー、アイアンサーガという、アイアンサーガは、この後12時過ぎから走られる予定の作品です。アイアンサーガ VS かなは、今年の3月、スチームで発売って結構直近じゃないですか。
This should be played at high volume. High volume.
Everything to the maximum, from rapping to stacking ones, not funds, albums with puns full of light. Yo, it can overlap the sun. They run it back before the track is done. Rap is done. Most songs lack.
来ましたね。こちらアストロボーイアニメパネルでございます。
Speed Gaming and the Japanese Restream. I have a very special guest for you right now. This is Adam Wescott, and he's going to be talking about Astro Boy, the Omega Factor, and a lot of things related to that. I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself, and I'm going to be here vicariously through you. While you're watching, what I would say is if you have questions, if you have comments you want to make, put them in the chat. We're watching, and I'll make sure to ask some of the good questions toward the end when there's an opportunity. Maybe I'll take one of them. Let's go ahead and get started. Take it away.
Great, sounds good. I'll try to make sure that we leave at least some time for questions at the end. This PowerPoint runs a little long, so hopefully I have a timer going here just to make sure we don't go way overboard. Okay, so here we go. Astro Boy Omega Factor. Who am I? My name's Adam Wescott. I'm a Wendigo over on Blue Sky. I have like a little rodent Andy's Chucky AVI as well from the show Shirobako, which is super good.
紹介
Written
です。
stuff for Crunchyroll News, Yadatachi, Comics Beat, Start Menu, and some other sites. I have a newsletter called AniWire.
講談社の方の自己紹介です。
Dungeon for a while, where I write about RPG Maker games. Do a podcast with a friend called Unpacking the Shelf, where we talk about games and comics and stuff. I like Dragon Quest, a bunch of other things, but we're not here to talk about me. We are here to talk about Astro Boy Omega Factor, the Game Boy Advance.
アストロボーイのゲームボーイアドバン
So
ス
what is
と
Astro
か
Boy Omega Factor? It is an action game for Game Boy Advance. It came out December 18th, 2003.
海外
It's
の
a
方です
collaboration
ね。
between Hitmaker and Treasure, and it honors the 40th anniversary of the original Astro Boy animated series. Now, Just like this game
ア
is
ス
called
トロボーイ
Astro
オ
Boy
メガ
Mega
ファク
Factor,
タ
there were
ー、ゲー
many
ムボーイ
different
アドバン
factors
ス
that
で
kind of
発売
came
されたアク
together
ショ
to
ンゲー
make
ム
this thing
2003
what
年
it
発
was,
売。
which is a pretty unique game and maybe one of the more unique games on the Game Boy Advance. So before we, as we sort of talk
鉄腕ア
walk
トム
down
とは、
what these different things are, and which will take a little bit, but
日
considering the kind
本
of
で
game
は
this
ア
is,
ト
I
ムと
think
呼
it
ばれてい
does
る。
help us if we kind of take piece by piece, like work
オリジナ
down
ルでは日
what
本
all
語
what are all
で
different
アトム
pieces
と
here. So first off, who is Astro Boy?
ドクター
So
テンマ
Astro Boy is a
が
robot with the heart of a
亡
human
くな
boy.
った
You
息
may
子
say,
の
when I say who is
首
Astro
を
Boy, you'll say, what do you mean? Like it's Adam, not Astro Boy, and that's true. Like
が亡くなった
he
後に
appeared
作った。
first in a comic called 021.Astro that I believe started running in 1953. I'm going to call him Astro rather than Adam in this case, just because this is a game we're talking about called Astro Boy Mega Factor, and if I call him Adam the entire time, it might get kind of it might not be great. So we're sticking at Astro for now. The Astro Boy origin has been retold and reversioned a couple different times, but most consistently, it's that Astro Boy is a robot who was made by the
茶の
extremely
水博士
smart
に引き
Dr.
取られた。
Tenma after Dr. Tenma's son Tobio
落ちの
passed
水。
away. But Tenma couldn't be
Ah.
satisfied with Astro, so he was sold to the robot circus, but he was adopted by the friendly Dr. Onoshimizu. Now, Astro is very powerful. He can shoot lasers out of his arm. He can shoot machine gun fire out of his butt, which is true somehow. He can fly, but his greatest strength of all is not his physical power, but is in fact his empathy. Now, there's a great storyline in Astro Boy called like the greatest robot in the world about a big horn guy named Pluto. Pluto's whole thing is he goes around finding all the greatest robots in the world and he says, I am stronger than you, and he beats them up. So of course Astro can see on the right here, he has this big showdown with Pluto and he beats him up. But you know, if this was a Shonen Jump comic or something more recent, that would be where the story starts. Like that would be where it would stop, I mean. Like Astro beats up the bad guy, that'd be it. But even back at in his time in the 1950s, 1960s, Tezuka had greater ambitions than that. And so the story ends with Astro and Dr. Onoshimizu like looking up at the faces of all these robots who passed away over the course of the story, saying, you know, Professor, I still believe robots will all become friends someday and never ever fight each other again. From the very beginning, the idea of violence and nonviolence and peace was kind of fundamental to this story. I think there are people today who, when like pointing at anime or video games or whatever, they'll say, oh, like this stuff isn't political, or like it's not political in the way that you think. But I think if you talk like that, you're really selling folks like Tezuka short. Like Osamu Tezuka was someone who had all kinds of ideas about the world he was in. He was drawing constantly, and he was putting all those ideas in his works all the time. Now, some of those ideas like don't line up with our ideas. Some of those ideas are really strange, but he really wanted to fit as much as he could of everything around him into the kinds of stories he made. You could say, in fact, so this is Osamu Tezuka right here, sitting on a giant pile of Astro Boy comics and various other things. He's the guy who created Astro Boy and made it what it is. Was born in 1928, died in 1989. He was
原
originally a
作者の
doctor
手塚治
before
虫
he
先生
decided
の
to
紹
draw.
介ですね。
He effectively, so he's known pretty often as what's called like the god of manga because
鉄
he,
腕アトム。
people say, kind of created like the medium as we know it. Is that true? He was very influential. There are a lot of like other folks who also did a lot of great stuff, but certainly like he made lots and lots of comics and really like pushed things forwards in terms of what could
あ
be
とは
done.
代
You
表
see
作、アトム、あ
quote
とは
from
リ
Ryan
ボンの
Hamburg
騎士
here
と
saying
か
he。synthesized existing Japanese American comics into what would become the basic shape of Japanese story manga in the post-war period. Like when we talk about what manga looks like today, stuff like Dragon Ball, Naruto, or even things like Skip Beat,
ジャングル大帝も手
like
塚
F
先
or
生
something
なん
more
です。
indie. A lot of that stuff is all operating in a tradition that Tezuka and his folks helped make.
結構代表作
Now,
が
in
結
terms of
構
Tezuka's
あ
early
る。
stuff,
あ、
the
出てますね、
comic
こ
that
っち
put him on
に。
the scene really was New Treasure Island or Shin Takarajima back in
新宝
1947.
島
This was one of
と
the very
新
earliest
宝
examples of
島
what's called a
メトロ
story
ポリス
comic that
大
was
都
influenced
会
by
ジ
cinema
ャングル
in
大
a
帝
way.
が紹介されてますね。
Another masterpiece of his, he did Metropolis in
代表
1949,
作
which
いっぱい。
became a pretty great film many years later. And then what we call in the US Kimba the White Lion, but in Japanese is Jungle Taite or Jungle Emperor. I
日
should
本の
say
漫画
these
界の
three series were all pretty big deal.
伝
And
説
these were all
の
before Astro Boy. So it's not necessarily the case that Astro Boy was his breakthrough success, although it was really huge. It was that he was already kind of laying the groundwork for all this. He had these hits to his name. It was just Astro Boy that sort of took him to the next level, as it were. Now, I mentioned earlier that Osamu Tezuka could draw all kinds of comics.
手塚治虫
And
さん
yeah,
も、
like the
手
really
塚治虫
amazing
先
thing
生
about
も、
him was he drew comics in just about every single genre you could think of. Like it'd be one thing if he was really good at drawing superhero comics, one thing if he was great at drawing medical comics or supernatural comics or romance comics.
わあ、なんか
But
た
he
くさんキ
basically
ャ
did everything.
ラクター
So,
が、
for instance, you have Blackjack from 1973, really cool comic, a medical series about this cool doctor who wanders around solving impossible procedures. There's a famous scene from Blackjack I love where he operates on his own intestines while in an Australian outback surrounded by rabid dingoes. That's a scene from that comic. It's bonkers. Phoenix is one of his
一応
greatest
メト
works.
ロ
It's
ポリスは
12
メトロ
volumes
ポ
long,
リス
never
ですかね。
completed.
多分。
Cosmic sci-fi history, just everything is in there.
単
The
行本の
world
表
is
紙に
like
大都会
destroyed
って
and
書いてあ
reborn
る
in
か
the
ら。
second storylines, is just really out there. Doro
大都会とは書い
1967
てい
is
る
a
けども。
historical horror comic of lots of blood and gore. He could really just do all
ブラッ
this
クジャッ
stuff,
ク、
and
火の
that's not
鳥、
even
ドロ
everything
ロ。
he could do. Like he did a historical comic called Message to Adolf about World
あ、
War
ブラックジャッ
II.
クも
He
手
did a
塚先
bunch
生なん
of
です
like
か？
corny sex comics, one Barbara and several others. So he was just his range is pretty
何でした
incredible.
っけ？
Now, another
なん
unique thing
か、
about Tezuka
あと
as
は、
time have gone on, people have adapted a number of his works
ア
into
ストロボーイとド
original
ロ
stories
ロ
on their own. One of the more successful
の、
ones
これ
is
は
Naoki Urasawa's
結
Pluto,
構最近
which
のメ
came
ディア
out
ミック
some
スと
years
かなんで
ago,
す
was
かね。
adapted into an anime series that's screened on
あ、
Netflix
医者知
last
識を
year
使
or
っ
the year
て書
before
いた
that,
や
I
つ。
believe.
へー。
Definitely a really interesting take, kind of reinterpreting like the cartoonish elements as Astro Boy as this neo-noir with Urasawa's signature kind of realist
あ、リメイク、
edge to the art. And then you have a couple different cool adaptations of Doro, which I mentioned earlier.
手
You have
塚
Set,
作
you have
品に
Search
イン
and
スパイアさ
Destroy,
れ
which
た
was
作
just
品紹介。
recently translated in
あ
English by
あ、
Atsushi
本人
Kaneko,
もお医者
one
さんの
of
資
the
格を持ってらした。
greatest, coolest
あ
comics
あ、
artists
すご
currently
い。
working, shamefully undertranslated in the US. On the right here, you'll also see there was a recent MAPPA anime adaptation of Dororo as well, which had the director of Spy Family
とんでも
and
ないことしてます。
1999 Hunter Hunter attached.
5冊同時連載してて、さすがに締め切りが無理と学生のアシスタントさん呼んだけど、編集者がいない間に別の依頼原稿を書いてたという、なかなかすごい人。
So Astro Boy, aside from being an extremely popular character and an extremely popular comic, was one of the most important influential anime productions ever. So the most important by far was probably the 1963 version, which kind of
モ
set the
ノクロ、
standard
1963年にモノ
for
クロ
anime, serial
アニメ
anime
化
as a
されて、
whole, you could say.
80年に
Now
は
that's
カ
not
ラーア
to
ニメ化。
say that Astro Boy was like the first piece of Japanese animation, because it was not. If folks want to learn more about this, I recommend reading Jonathan Clement's
チャッ
book
ト欄
on
の
anime
情報
history,
な
which
の
gets
で、
into this. Astro Boy doesn't come up in that book until the halfway point, which I guess you could say is maybe a bit on Jonathan Clement's part. He's sort of messing with the reader a bit.
ちょいちょい
But
チャット
I
欄
mean, certainly there was stuff
拾
before
ってい
it,
きながら、
but the idea of
聞いてる
having
ん
a
ですけれ
weekly
ども。
series that like took shortcuts in order to meet like the standards of getting it up on television every week. This was something that people hadn't really done
あ
before in
あ、
Japan
確か
or
に。
really
お
in
医
many
者さん
places. And
の
Tezuka's
資格
folks
も。
were able to pull it off somehow. I should also say a lot of really talented old anime folks worked on this show. Like if you're watching Mobile Suit Gundam G-Quacks right now, like, you know, Yoshiyuki Tamano did the earlier Gundam stuff. Tamino also played a role on Astro Boy. Yeah, people like Osamu Dezaki, one of the all-time kind of auteurist anime directors, he was on this show. Gizaburi Sugi was there. Rintaro, who actually did the great Metropolis film, was there. Just all of these people who would go on to make the anime industry what it was for several decades later, all played a role in making this thing happen. Now, some years later, there was a 1980 version, and that was in color, which was pretty cool. I don't know nearly as much about that one, except I believe it should be pretty easily available to find and check out. Both 1963 and 1980 were dubbed, from what I understand, and should be fairly accessible, or at least they were accessible on DVD and that sort of thing some time ago. What I will say about 1980, I read a piece by Mike Toole, who's a great anime writer. He talked about the version of the story The Greatest Robot in the World in the 1980 version, which runs for about 2 episodes, being especially good. So if you'd like a nice taster to Astro Boy, might not be a bad idea seeking out the 1980 version, like looking for some of those storylines that adapt some of the stuff in the comic and looking through those. Now, there was one last significant Astro Boy animated series, and that's Astro Boy 2003. Now, this was a 40th
2003年の
anniversary
鉄腕アトム。
celebration of the original anime. They brought on an all-star team of creatives, particularly scriptwriters.
40周年記念のオリジナルアニ
A
メ
lot。of these writers actually wrote for the Ultraman
アストロボーイ
revival
鉄腕アトム
back in the
のことかな。
1990s and going through
時期的に
2000s, like starting of Ultraman Tiga and going ahead. So some names people might recognize.
2003
You
年
have
4月
stuff
6日か
like
ら
Chiaki
2004年
Kanaka,
3月28
who
日
did
ま
shows
で
like Serial Experiments
放
Lane
送されました。
and Digimon Tamers, one of my personal favorites. He wrote a couple episodes of this series. You have Keiichi Hasegawa, who, if you are a fan of SSS Gridman or Dynazenon, he worked on those. Also did like one of the great kind of noble failures, which I love, of Tokusatsu history, Ultraman Nexus. Sadayuki Murai as well, who did the script to Boogie Pop Phantom, to a couple of Satoshi Kon films, I believe, and to Natsumi's Book of Friends as well, so you're into that. All these different people worked on that show. You also have Mark Handler, who was the guy who did he was the ADR director and he did the script for the dub version of Fooly Cooly, like one of the great dubs of the 2000s. And he was actually, from what I understand, the script editor on Astro Boy 2003. Like he was working with all the Japanese writers trying to collage things together. He wrote a script for the show as well. Now, actually, a lot of people on the team apparently did not like Mark Handler because he was sort of in a bad spot. Like he was in charge of looking at all the scripts and making sure that they were a good fit for American television. They wouldn't set off any censors. And unfortunately, like the Ultraman folks were really just used to just doing really cool creative stuff because that's what survived productions the Ultraman folks let them get away with. And unfortunately, that was not the way it worked on television in the US. So famously, the dub for Astro Boy, it doesn't necessarily butcher it totally, but they changed up the soundtrack. They cut out some of the more difficult parts from the show. It's changed enough that I don't know if you can really call it a faithful version of what the Japanese staff were aiming for. And to be fair, they were aiming at something that would reach audiences all over the world. But we currently live in a world now where, like, for whatever reason, you still can't really get the original, like, intended Japanese version of Astro Boy 2003. It's unfortunately not available. Unless, if you go looking for fan subs and stuff, like, some of that stuff is floating around. But I'm hoping that one day, like, maybe Sony will relent and Discotek or something will get their hands on a proper English version of this. So the reason I bring up Astro Boy 2003 is because this series, as it's coming out to hit the 40th anniversary celebration of the original anime, it then spawns a couple of video games that all borrow pretty heavily from the visual aesthetic of this show rather than from the earlier ones. So you have two major titles I'm aware of. You have Astro Boy for the PlayStation 2. This was developed by Sonic Team, weirdly enough, and I believe it came out in 2004.
プレイステーション2とゲームボーイアドバンスでゲームが出ていると。
Mega Factor, actually. I don't know much about this game. My understanding is that, like, not necessarily as special as a Mega Factor, but if there are folks out there who are big fans of Astro Boy for the PS2, feel free to shout it out. That's cool. But we're here to talk about a Mega Factor, and a Mega Factor for the GBA
プレイステーション2版の
is the game I think that's really remembered.
ゲームボーイアドバンス
That's
版
right, our boy
で
is
ア
finally
ストロボー
here.
イ鉄腕
We're
アトム
actually
メ
talking
ガ
about the
ファン
game
タ
now. After a couple minutes of prologue, we can finally get to the actual game itself. So who made Astro Boy a Mega Factor? Somehow I always thought, this is a Treasure game, and definitely Treasure played a huge role in
鉄
making
腕ア
this
トム
thing.
メガファクター
Doing
の
research for this,
を
as a matter of fact,
作
it was
った
Hitmaker
メーカー
as
さん
well
の
who was
お
responsible.
話かな。
So Hitmaker, it's a Hitmaker production with Treasure as well. So Hitmaker, for folks who know, it was an inner studio at Sega. They were formerly called AM3. They were especially in charge of arcade games. They produced stuff like Virtual Tennis
ク
and
レイジー
Crazy
タクシー
Taxi.
バーチャテニスヒットメー
Around
カ
the
ーさん
early 2000s, they started shifting more into making games for the Dreamcast, making games for consoles rather than arcades, and so their name was changed to Hitmaker. They
リ
put
メ
out
イクア
a
ニ
bunch
メ
of
版を原作とし
pretty
ている
cool
そうな
stuff,
んですね。
actually. There was a producer there named Mie Kumagai, and from what I understand from a Play magazine issue 31 that I read, she was the one who actually came up with the idea for doing this. She said Osamu Tezuka is the god of animation circles. You've always wanted to do a game according to his
プロデュー
stories.
サーの熊谷さん
And so she was kind of casting around and saying, okay, who should I pick to, like, put this thing together? So her hand lands on Tetsu Okano, the director, who at this time hadn't necessarily done a lot of stuff. Probably the game he'd made that he was most famous for, from what I understand, was an RPG called Segaga, which was very strangely just a role-playing game, like, set in the Sega studios, starring Sega characters, folks who make Sega games, that
デ
kind
ィ
of
レク
thing.
ターの
One of these
岡野
really
さん
inside baseball titles that developed a cult audience. I believe there are folks who are trying to fan translate. I'm not sure if that's went anywhere. But so Okano he's a big fan of Treasure. He says, I was such a big fan, I just decided to actually bring them in to help out with the game. So Tetsuo Okono and the producer, they teamed up, they went to Treasure, said, hey, do you want to help us make this game? And so Treasure signed up with them to make this title. Now we got to talk about what is Treasure. Now, if you're if you're a video game fan of a certain vintage, you're going to say, what do you mean, who's Treasure? Treasure is just one of the greatest 2D action developers ever made. But let's say either you lived under a rock or you're not a Gen X or a millennial and you don't know who Treasure is. Treasure is a studio that was founded by ex-Konami developers. They specialized in fast-paced creative action games. Their games didn't always sell, but a lot of your favorite developers are inspired by them. If you look at a lot of modern indie games that maybe they'll have one idea that they develop in all kinds of directions, or they'll just have multiple stages that just go really wild in terms of having cool stuff going on. Or even something like one game I think of, there's an indie game called Copy Kitty, which pretty much lifts its weapon system from a bunch of different Treasure games in terms of how you're supposed to use it. You definitely have folks out there who played Treasure when they were kids and are now making these same kinds of extremely creative, out there games. If DBK is out there, I don't know if you're a Treasure fan or whatever, but do you want to briefly talk about it?
Which Treasure game should I gush about?
Well, that's a good question. I was actually going to jump to Gunstar Heroes. Is that something you can talk about?
Gunstar Heroes is sure. You can talk about Gunstar Heroes. Fantastic game. When we were talking before, we got on the topic of Bleach DS, another game that's really run in the community a lot. DS second, DS third. They've actually made one of the best Wario games, in my opinion. Is done by
Wario
Treasure.
World?
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
And then they actually get a lot of anime license. So I'm gonna look it up to make sure I don't say the name wrong.
But actually, I'll jump a couple slides ahead. I highlighted some of the anime titles here. Right.
Oh, you did? Okay, well, I could talk on most of them because, just, like you said, the quality of Treasure's games are way above usually the counterparts, but they don't tend to necessarily sell well. A lot of them are, I don't really know what causes that, but they're considered, it's very correct name, I think, because a lot of them are considered hidden treasures among the community. A lot of people, these games get into marathons. They're kind of beloved by not only runners, but other game developers and other creators, like you said. I don't know which one you want me to particularly touch on.
We could talk about the Bleach one. I have a soft spot for that. These came out after Astro Boy and Mega Factor, but I remember getting the first Bleach Fighter for Christmas and having a lot of fun with that, just because it felt like it sort of captured the appeal of the different characters in that game, which you can't always rely on. That's one of the great things about licensed properties, I guess you can sort of think. How do you interpret someone like Kenpachi, for instance? So it felt like they did a good job of capturing the feeling of those really out there Shinigami and cool guys in the earlier games. Though I've heard the second one's actually even better, though I haven't had a chance to play it.
Yeah, they're as far as fighting games though, they're considered the best on the DS, and the first one's considered, has one of the best story modes. Just in general, their attention to detail and their focus on the game system is what separates them from other developers. They tend to put a lot of focus on that, so they're highly technical. There's a lot of pretty much always some sort of canceling or combo that you can do in the game. Omega Factor is no different in that regard. It's probably got one of the most complicated cancel and combo systems for on as a beat 'em up for the DS.
Yeah. Or for the Game Boy Advance, because it was
for the DS. Sorry, Game Boy Advance. And then so the game I was thinking of is recently I was playing Dragon Drive, which is another series we haven't had at the marathon, but that game is extremely well done. The attention to detail is second to none, and I don't normally like rail shooters, but it felt so different from what was normal that I've kind of fallen in love with the game. Some of the other things, if you want to talk about really well-known things, like Ikaruga is probably like one of their most well-known if you're going back to the arcade.
Right.
They did Bangai O, which is like a shoot 'em
I'm gonna
up
flip
for
up
the.
here. I made sure to highlight
Nice.
Bangai O's
Oh,
for
nice.
here.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So
A mecha game where you can have a robot with a giant
なん
baseball
か
bat.
いろい
That's
ろ
the
と
kind of game.
なんか罪と罰とかシルエットミラ
I
ージュ
mean, some of their
Ah.
games, even the ones that might have
Ah.
been misses, like Rakugaki Showtime, still did things that were kind of
レイリアントシルバーガー
unique. I would say maybe Dynamite.
Silver Gun.
Dynamite Heady is
Oh.
another one. Like Dynamite Heady is definitely like a very unique game, but it did
ト
things
レジャーさんが
pretty
出した
unique
ゲ
for
ー
the
ムですか
time,
ね
like control wise. And
Yeah.
I will just say this: like Dynamite Heady makes for a great speed run. That's probably why it's so popular. And you already talked on Gunstar Heroes.
Yeah, I'm
but
briefly going to
there's-
shout out, since you were talking about weird movement, Silhouette Mirage. It's, I believe, a game where your character's moves just completely change based on the direction you're facing, which is just such an out there idea. Like, definitely a lot of treasure titles are famous for just having like these really strange concepts in terms of how the character moves, how they interact with things, or even just having really out there levels. Like I shouted out Gunstar Heroes earlier, I just wanted to put in a picture from the board game level.
Nice.
There's a board game level in Gunstar Heroes for some reason, which is just, I mean, the game has all kinds of other stuff in it to recommend it.
Oh,
It
so
moves
that-
really fast.
So the board game is actually how you proceed through the game.
Oh,
So
like in
it's
general?
actually like in general, that's how you move through the stages.
Okay.
Which was really unique. So when you're playing that game, you're always kind of like, it adds this like RNG luck factor that makes it more exciting from moving place to place because you don't know necessarily what order you're going to land on the stages.
I see.
so-
'Cause I was playing Gunstar. God, I was playing Gunstar Heroes. I wasn't old enough to have a Genesis, so this was like on the Wii when it came out on Virtual Console. And I don't remember. Now that I think about it, maybe they kind of mix things up. I don't remember getting to the board game level. Like definitely, there's tons of like art to the board game. I don't remember like specifically the board game stuff. I just remember like seeing it online. Like
Yeah, it just-
definitely.
Yeah, it's really, really unique, even the way you move through stages. And they did that again in not the board game aspect, but just like the way you move throughout the game and the controls is I have to name drop Guardian Heroes if you're going to talk
right.
about one more game.
For the
'cause
Sega
that-
Saturn, right?
Oh yeah,
Oh.
oh yeah. One of the best beat 'em ups in general. I mean, just a quality list. I haven't played some of like the later titles that they released with Capcom. My favorites always kind of lay with Bleach. I'm definitely big in the community for that. And then you had Hajime no Ippo, the fighting there, which is, by the way, probably one of my favorite sports titles. They did it, in my opinion, much better than the PlayStation 2 and Wii counterparts.
Really?
Just for in general, like, the controls for that game are much tighter. Overall, just they captured the feel of the anime a little bit better. And it's probably if you're a big fan of Hajime no Ippo, definitely one of the better titles. As far as anime game goes, I think that's the majority of it. I don't think I mean, they did. You had Yu Yu Hakusho, Makyo, Toitsutsen, but
Right. I'd also like to briefly shout out, since I made sure to include Gunstar Heroes there, one of the lead people who worked on Gunstar Heroes, the main programmer, was Mitsuru Yaida, or Yaimon as he's called. And he made an appearance on Astro Boy Mega Factor itself as someone working on that team later, along with the composer Norio Hanzawa, or like NON as he's sometimes called. They both worked on that later game. Now, Hanzawa wasn't like the only composer on a Mega Factor, but he was definitely there. So it certainly delivered, I think, that Hitmaker, like when they were working with Treasure, they made sure like a lot of the folks who made games like Gunstar Heroes that kind of were there and like making this new Mega Factor game, which is pretty cool. There's that creative lineage they are leading from these earlier games to these later ones.
きついですね。
All
こちらは
right,
何
so I think
先
we're
ほどの
gonna keep
いくつかのゲーム
moving
の紹介
here. So after all of that, What is Astro Boy Omega Factor? What can we say
ア
about
ス
it?
トロボーイオメガファク
Well, it's
タ
an
ーとは
action
何
game,
な
of
のか。
course. Treasure-made action games. Your Astro Boy, a
これ
little
はアクション
robot.
ゲー
You
ムで
fly
す。
around, punch things,
ラン
kick
サーヒーロー
things,
ズ。
shoot lasers out of your arm, shoot
アク
machine
ショ
guns
ン
out
ゲー
of your
ム、
butt,
なんか
rocket
すご
around.
い敵
See
出てき
this,
て。
there's a score in the corner, like beating things up increases your super level. There's how do I put it? A couple of like on-rail like shooter levels where you fly around and blow things up. There's a little bit of that genre switching that you sometimes see in Treasure games. I would say that like the game's a little more restrained than some of Treasure's other stuff because it is in the Game Boy Advance. You can really tell, like from the size of the sprites on the screen, the number of enemies they're able to fit on the screen. They're pushing the engine pretty far. I think. Like sometimes there's even some slowdown. From what I understand, they did improve the US version from the original Japanese version. Like they buffed it up a bit, added some difficulty levels, that kind of thing. The version we got is like a bit more polished, but like still you get the sense that they're doing what they do in all their games, which is that they're sort of really pushing the boundaries of what you can get away with this system. So it's an action game to beat 'em up, but it's also a role-playing game. Now, not necessarily in the conventional sense, like there aren't turn-based battles, you can't have people in your party. It's still a beat 'em up at the end of the day. But there is a
RPG も。
system where there are lots of little characters who are hiding all over the game, and when you find them and talk to them, you can level up different abilities. Like for instance, you can increase your life, you can increase your laser ability. There's an ability called Sensor, which is kind of annoying. Basically what it means is that it brightens up these various dark levels that you find. So it's sort of like pay a toll to not be inconvenienced, which maybe sucks a little bit. But I mean, I guess it's a thought that counts, perhaps. And story actually plays a surprisingly big role in this game, I believe. Like the way it works is you play through it once, you go through about 7 stages or so, but then once you reach the end, you actually loop back to the start and it opens up a stage select where you can kind of revisit places you found, fight new enemies and bosses, learn secrets about what's really happening. You have to kind of piece things together from all over the game in order to achieve the true ending, which is pretty interesting. And again, more of like a story kind of game than you'd expect from a Treasure game. Like Treasure games usually don't, I mean, sometimes do that kind of thing, but I think the sort of story that you see in this game is maybe even more Tetsuo Kano, like the director, like his specialty, rather than Treasure was really good at. So I think that does give Astro Boy Omega Factor kind of a unique flavor among a lot of Treasure's other
話を
stuff.
されてるのかな。
Now, aside
それ
from
とも
these
何か
things,
別
it's
の話
also a
題。
Tezuka game. So you might notice we brought up Blackjack earlier in this presentation. Blackjack actually appears in Astro Boy Omega Factor. He plays a pretty important role in the story. You just meet him, he's there, you talk to him, he helps things resolve. So Blackjack is there. Kimbo the White Lion is also
ジャン
there.
グル
Now,
大帝の
it's a
ゲーム
little
と。
tricky because Kimbo the White
手塚さん
Lion,
の作
Kimbo the
品、手
White
塚
Lion
先生の
himself
作
is not in the
品を
game.
原作にしたゲーム
But
が。
there is another character who takes Kimba's form and kind of shifts between him and a couple others in a boss battle and plays an important role in the story. So
ジャングル大帝のキャラクターがアトムのゲームに出てきている。
they're reaching out to all these different famous Tezuka works to bring them all in. Now, who is this guy? So this character here is Sharaku, who's the villain of the game. He's from a Tezuka comic called The Three-Eyed One. And I think this kind of thing for me is also what helps Astro Boy Omega Factor stand out from a lot of other stuff. It's not just that it takes characters from popular Tezuka comics or Tezuka comics we know of. It takes characters from like all over Tezuka's over, including characters who don't really show up that much in English, like the Wonder 3 and that
こ
kind
の
of
子は
thing.
何者や三つ目が通るのキャラク
You
タ
kind
ー
of play through this game, just see characters pop up and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe
といったところ
who is
で、
this person? I want to find out. In the
こちら
same
トー
way
ク
that
セッショ
back
ンの
in the
途中
day,
ではございま
like
す
for
が、
Super Smash Bros, I think a lot of
ここ
people
で
were
司会
inspired
交
by
代のお
characters
時
like
間となりま
Ness
した。
or the characters from Fire
この後
Emblem,
も
like
鉄ア
Roy,
トム
for
のトーク
instance.
セッショ
Like
ン、
go
そし
back and
て
check out those
ア
games. This
アニ
Omega
メスピードラン
Factor
フェスティ
has
バ
some of
ル
that appeal as well.
2025お楽しみく
However,
ださ
I
い。
should say it
それ
does
で
get a
は
little
ありが
confusing
とうございまし
because
た。失礼い
the
たし
way
ま
it
す。
uses those characters isn't necessarily consistent. Like you'll have some characters that are characterized according to 2003 anime production, but you have others who are characterized more like they're from the manga source material. And then you have some that don't really act anything like the way they're depicted in the original. I guess the way you can think of it is like there's this great anime OVA from back in
は
the
い。
day called Giant Robo, The
ここ
Day
から
the
はイル
Earth
カンが
Stood
担当い
Still,
たします。よろしくお
where
願いいた
similarly the
し
director of that show
ま
took
す。はい。
characters from all over Mitsubishi
ということで、画面の方ね、手塚作品に限らず、
a
他の
giant cool epic story
作
where
品なんか
everyone's
も、
like playing a role in the
出
story,
て
but
お
they
り
all
まし
they
た
aren't necessarily
ね。
faithful to
私
their
はブ
original
ラックジャック
depictions.
が
I would say the same is actually probably true to this game. It's all a bit
電
messy.
子版
And
で
that might frustrate some
全部
Tezuka
持って
devotees who are like, hey, wait a minute, like this person isn't
さ
what
す
I
がに
remember
ちょっ
them,
と
like they
書
don't
店版
behave
は
in the way I expect them to.
ね。
However, this is also part of Tezuka's plan. Don't forget, Osamu Tezuka could do it all.
まあ今回最初、今、ちょうどあれですね、手塚治虫先生の作品が、一通り書かれていますね。左下にキノコちゃんとかが
Dr. Otonomizu
た
would
りと
appear if you
か、
wanted like a nice scientist guy. There's a
して
special
いま
detective
す
that he'd
よ
often
ね。
reuse. And so it's not necessarily that all these stories take place in the
そう
same
ですね。
universe. But like Hollywood
右はあれか
actors,
な
he'd take
リボ
his
ンの
various
父な
characters
の
and
かな。
he'd repurpose them for all kinds of
こう見ると、
roles.
な
So
か
you
な
could
か
say that
どのキャラクターも特徴あって、
Astro Boy
いいです。
Megafactor is very faithful to how Tezuka used his famous star system. It takes these various characters
でない
and
で
it
って。
repurposes them for
はい。
the roles that the game
そう
needs. And that's not necessarily to say that
ま
it's always
あ、
completely
もう
faithful to the
ね、
source
手
material,
塚治虫
but
先
it
生
is
が
like is
亡
made
くなって
with
から
love
もう
and
かなり
respect
の
for that material,
時
I
が
believe,
経っ
which
て
I
お
think
り
is
ま
pretty
す
cool.
が、未だね、
Now,
まあ
Tezuka
先ほどちらっ
himself
と
also did
アニメなんかの話も出
a
て、
couple of
いたかな
big
と思うんで
crossover
すけど
works,
も、
one of which was
まあ
Sea
ね、
Ultramarine Express. It was a TV film from 1979,
新しい
produced for
作品、
Nippon
はい、
Television's Iowa
リメイクなん
Chikyu
かも含め
Bosuku
て
charity
出てい
program,
るの
something
で、
like Love Conquers Earth or something like
はい、
that.
すごい
The reason I
な
bring
と
it
い
up
うと
is
こ
that a
ろ
lot of the
と
characters I
思う
mentioned
とこ
here
ろで
all
す
appear
ね。
in
はい。
this TV film. There's
今は
Blackjack,
ね、
Genma, Shikoku, the
手塚治虫先
underwater
生の
train
娘
itself
さんです
appears,
ね。
the Moon
は
Empire,
い。
which appears in
手
Astro
塚
Boy
治虫さんでしたっ
Megafactor,
けが、
plays a
今い
role
ろ
in
いろ
this
と
film
活
as
動され
well.
てたりとか
I
も
can't say
さ
for
れてた
certain
か
if
な
this
という
movie
記
is like
憶
a
が、
direct
私の
inspiration, but
中
I
に
would
はご
bet
ざ
the
い
people who
ま
made
す。
this game
は
were
い。
aware of it when they made Astro Boy Megafactor and kind of worked in some
な
references
かな
to
か
it as
こう、
well.
新作という形では難しい
So,
かも
I
しれ
mean,
ない。お、
probably you're not going to
マリ
find
ン
many
エクスプレ
folks in
ス。
the US who are familiar
ア
with
ン
this
ダーシー
film,
ス
but
ー
if
パー
you
トレイン、
are,
マリンエクスプレス。
Astro Boy Megafactor is probably like the closest you'll find to a video game version of this
1979
thing, even though it's
年に
not advertised as
日
such.
テレさんで
Now,
話
let's
し
go
た
a
と。
little bit
ああ、ヒッ
beyond
トメー
Astro
カー
Boy
とトレジャー
Megafactor
出てますね。
and
ヒット
talk
メ
about
ーカー
what
セガ
happened to
で
the
すね。
people who made it afterwards. So, as a matter of fact, a lot of the people who made this game
ト
aren't
レジャー、
really in
そ
the
うです。
games
まあま
industry
あ、有名
anymore.
なと
For
ころです
instance,
ね。
Hitmaker
はい。
itself was folded back into Sega in 2004 as AM3,
はい。
and in 2009 it was just merged
そう、
back
こ
into Sega
れ、
itself, into other
あれかな
departments.
アス
I
トロ
think a
ボを
couple
読
of
み残っ
people from there are
た
still probably in the games industry, but
初めて
Hitmaker
のやつ
itself like doesn't really exist in that way anymore. Treasure
のやつ
itself
か
is
な
still around,
あ
but
れ、
it hasn't really put out a game in a
欲しい
while.
ん
It's
です
sort
よ
of
ね。普通
in
に
hiatus
面
mode.
白そ
The last game they did was
う。
Geist
なんで、
Crusher
どっ
God
かで
from
やりたいなと思っ
2014,
て
which
て、
was an
面白
expansion
か
of
った。
Geist
結構
Crusher
海
for
外イベン
3DS.
ト
That
ですね。
apparently wasn't
海
very
外イベント
successful,
だ
so they
と
moved
何回か
on.
採用され
My
て、ジャパニーズ
understanding
リ
is
スト
the
リームの
original
中でも
president's
ね、
still there.
出
They're
てた
like
り
licensing out
し
Ikaruga and
ま
that
す。
kind of
は
thing.
い。日本語名
But
だったあれ
Treasure
か。
itself
鉄
hasn't
ア
produced
ト
a
ム、
game in
ア
a
トムハ
long
ートムっ
time. If
て
they ever
いう、
decide to, it'll be a huge
横
deal.
スクロール型のア
Now,
クションゲー
as it
ム。ま
happens,
あ、ロックマンとかね、あれ
the
系に
Akuma
近い
guy,
のが一
the
番イメージ
she
しやすいですか
became
ね。
just the president of
は
Hitmaker
い。
full stop in 2003, which was a pretty big
ってい
deal
うと
for
ころ
the
で
Japanese games
出
industry
て
at that
い
time.
たところですね。
She's now
はい。
actually
で、開発
developing
の方
smartphone
のご
games
紹
as an
介
executive
です
producer
ね。
at this company
はい。で
called
は、ヒットメーカー
COLLPL
の方
Colopel.
で
She
す。
actually,
長
I
井美
think,
樹さん。
maybe did relatively well compared to some other
当時
folks
で
here.
すね。当時ですね。
Tetsuo Kano
はい。
himself, he developed a game called Thunder Force 6, grand return of
今
the Thunder
は、
Force series, highly anticipated.
プロ
Unfortunately,
プラ
kind of a
に
mess
いる
blew
の
up
か
his
なこの辺で、ス
career.
マホ
He
ゲー
left
の
Sega, now he
開
runs
発
something
の
called
プロデュー
Hyuga
サーされてる人
Incorporated.
で、
So he's a small developer now.
下が、
Rumor is that he's kind of
岡
difficult to
野
work
哲
with,
さ
and
ん、
that maybe why
サ
he's
ン
in
ダ
that
ーボ
position
ー
at the
ス
moment.
6。なるほどね。
I
はい。
wanted to shout out one other
本当
member
に
of
ま
the
した。
team who is
はい。
Tomohiro Saito. He was a freelance designer and artist who was one of the many people working in this game.
斎
He
藤
also worked on
智
Streets of
春
Rage
さ
2
ん、
back in
も
the
し
day,
かし
as
たら
well
一
as
人が、
several the kind of CCG cult set
が、
titles.
あ
So
あ、はい
he
はいはい。先ほどのね、
lost his
GBA
leg to
版のアトム
cancer
の
and he
ゲー
died of
ム。
cancer in
あ、カルド
2006.
セプト。
Hyuga Studio's Twitter put
カ
out
ル
a
ドセプ
tweet
ト。 なるほど。
some years ago,
はい。
or actually more recently maybe, which was saying
い
this
つ
moon
もわ
stage,
からなく
moon
な
stage
る、
from
ストリート
Astro
オブ
Boy
エイジ
was
はビアナッ
created
ク
by
か。はい。
Tomorrow's
ビアナック
Pixel
2で
Art.
すね。
Because of this
はい。
work, he was delayed in getting to the hospital, lost one of his legs, and finally died. This game is
を、
filled with his soul.
まあ、携わってい
Now
た
you can
方と
say,
いうと
wow,
こ
like
ろ
it's so cool he'll put everything in
ね。
this game, or you can say,
で、
why did someone have to
2006年に
lose
キャ
their
ンサー
leg
だから
making a
がん
video
か
game?
な。
That's
は
ridiculous.
い。
Like apparently what happened was he was just
で、
pushing
亡く
himself
なられ
extremely
てい
hard to
る
finish
と
it up and just didn't go to the
いう
hospital because he waited, or you can say
ことです
because they
ね。
didn't give him time off or he didn't tell anyone what was happening to them, maybe he
本
lost his
当に
leg and
私の英語
died.
力が
Saito said
正しいかどう
in
か。
this games developer interview or the obituary that Brandon Sheffield wrote sometime again for the game developer.
そうですね。はい。
Saito said
本当に
legs
この
aren't
サズさん
necessary in the
は、そう
illustration
ですね。
industry.
はい。
But I just want to take a moment to shout out
ス
this
マク
fact
肉種
that
で亡
I
く
mean,
な
it's
ら
still
れて
true.
い
Game
る
development
そ
is
うで
still
す。
very difficult. I don't
あ、
know if people just simply
美食戦
lose
隊
their
バラ野
minds
郎。
to production, but certainly the conditions
美
are still
食戦
quite bad.
隊バカ野郎、バカじゃバラ野郎。
Considering Astro Boy Mega itself
だ
was
とあ
kind
れで
of
すね。
pitched as a
結構大
return
き
to
く
the
なってし
Helicon
ま
Days
う、
of Treasure.
ちょっと特
I think
徴
it's
の
also
ある
worth
ゲーム
pointing
で
at
すね。
how, in some degree, to some degree, maybe the work
や
conditions
ってるんです
around
けれ
this
ども。
game were also a callback to like some of the
ご
excesses
存知の
of
方
the
も
past in
も
terms
しか
of
する
what
といらっ
people
しゃ
were
るかも
expected to sacrifice to make stuff like this. I don't know if it was the game developer's bad management, if it was the fact that
そういう、
Saito was a freelancer rather than
実
someone who
際
was
に、
in-house.
開
These
発
things
に
all kind
携
of
わった方
contributed,
のが紹介もされ
but
ていま
definitely
す。
something that I think marks the legacy of this game along with everything else.
先ほどの GBA 版の
So what
ア
does
プリで
that
すね。
leave us with? Astro Boy Mega Factor, it's a very strange game. A lot of the people who worked on it are no longer in the industry before, or they've really been downsized in the industry. At the same time, it's kind of a miracle this thing was made. It's not perfect. There are parts of it that I think other treasure titles do better, and even parts that you can kind of feel the limits of its system, the sort of
なかな
stringiness and limits
か
of its system.
そうですね。い
But
ろ
this
い
is a
ろ
game that a lot of
と、
people hold in their hearts regardless. Like just the fact that
この当時
it's
の
filled
開
with so much
発
love
と
and
か
had a
携
good
わった
work
方
that
が、
is so ambitious in terms
ま
of
あ
telling this
も
large story
う、業
featuring
界
not
で、
just
まあ、
heroes and
この今
ministers, but
業
from
界
all
にもうい
over
なかっ
has a good
たりと
output.
か、まあ業界
I
自体
think
が
there are
こう、
people out there who still
というか
just
まあ結構ね、統合が
have respect for this
進ん
thing
で
even
みたい
today.
な
And if you're into anime
話を
licensing, this is
今、
definitely one of the
本
most
家の
interesting,
方
I
で
would
され
say.
ていますよ
And here are
ね。
the
はい。
sources. All right, it's question time.
ということで、質問時間なので、本家の方で何か質問
All right,
が
so I
あれ
had
ば
a、question. Do you
Hi.
think so? There's a difference between the Japanese release of this game and the international release of this game. Do you think there's a reason for that? And were there any other things that were adjusted between the releases besides the like weird
先
rebalancing
ほ
of the
どのゲーム
difficulty?
の日本語版と、いわゆるイン
That's
タ
a
ー
good
ナショナル
question.
版、英語版の
I would
違いとかっていうの
say
がある
I can't pull off the top of my head. Definitely the difficulty was a huge thing. My
まあ、よ
understanding
くある
was
話
in the
です
original
ね。
Japanese version,
リリー
the
スタイミ
difficulty
ン
was
グがずれてい
extremely
る作品、
difficult.
これは別に後に
And the
限ら
modern
ずだと
version
思うんです
was
け
much
ど、
harder.
リリー
Sort of
スがず
nicely
れて
added
い
a couple
る
extra steps in
場
that
合
seemed to make
は、そ
everything
の
a bit
間に
more
修
egregious.
正等入ったり
Speaking
とか
personally, I'm actually
があ
quite
った
bad
り
at
する
games
の
like
で、ま
Astro
あ、そ
Boy
の
Mega
辺で
Factor.
調整されたりとかっていうの
So
が、
certainly I'd be
ま
playing at one of the easier difficulties
あ、あ
just
る
because
と。
cranking it
ま
up
あ、それに
harder
よって結構、
definitely
作品によっ
for
ては理
me
解しが
and
た
then
い
fighting against the artificial
変更
sun
が
in
さ
the
れていた
second
りとか
level
ね。
just noticeably
は
tougher and
い。
it kind of
特
tightens it
に
up for
古いゲ
me.
ームに関しては、
So, but I
えーっ
think also like
と、
they
日
use it as an
本語
opportunity to
版
just
が難し
surpass
すぎ
like
て
good
海外
old
版では
times
簡
when
単に
things
な
were
ったりと
missing
か、
originally didn't have
まあもち
time
ろん
to
その
put in.
逆もあったりと
I
か
would
っていう
say
のが
that
あ
from
った
my
りするの
understanding,
で、
this the
まあこ
additions were
の
really driven by the studio
ね、スピード
themselves.
ラン界
This
隈
wasn't
と
something
か
like
だと
working
完
on
全
this
に、
title where they just went
JP
in
版、ES
changed
版
the
分かれ
difficulty
た
for
りとか
arbitrary
ね、
reasons, or they just
カ
like
テゴリーが分かれたりとか、そう
multiplied
いっ
the
たことも、
currency or
あった
like
りする
inserted
という
pop
のが、
culture references, whatever
特
it
に
is.
古い
Right?
ゲ
There
ーム
wasn't
は。
any of
まあ
that.
最近のゲームは
It
ね、
was
さす
more
がに
of
そういうの
a
はも
okay, this
う
was
な
a
いかな
couple
って
things
いう。
in the cutting
ほ
room
ぼ
floor that
ほぼ
should
統
have
一
been
され
in,
て
or
しまっているの
subsequently.
で、そういう部分はもうないのかなっていう気がしますね。はい。
I know that there was like some new enemies. Did we have
Yeah.
a list of the references to and I don't know if you went over some of them, like the boss fight where they turn into
Kimber the White
Kimber the
Lion.
White Lion, which is really cool. Were
Yeah.
there any other like characters that come out that are just so obscure and on for a second that might be
ゲームに出てきた
somewhat
敵の話を
like
して
hard
る
to
の。
notice?
I mean, they're all
I
over the place, and
they're all the
sometimes they're even
places.
kind of out of the way. Like the way that this game handles its cameos is sometimes you'll just punch a corner of the screen, and then a character will appear and say, "Surprise, it's me!" Like Unico, I think, is like hidden in Ancient Mu. You have to like rock it up to the top and find a little like urn that you smashed, and then Unico's in there. Some characters, it's like they don't even really have a reason to be there.
も
It's
ち
like,
らっとお
oh, we
話
found
あり
you.
ましたけどね、
But others are
そ
more
の、
integrated
まあ、
with the
単
plot.
一
Like again,
の
it's a bit
作
tricky
品で
because the
も、
characters
他の手塚
don't
作
always
品でね、
behave or
キャラ
perform
ク
the
ター
way you'd
が出てきた
expect,
り
like
とか、
considering their source
ま
material.
あそういったも
Like the
のも
final
やっぱりよ
boss,
く
the
あっ
final
たり
boss, I
す
guess,
る
is
の
like a
で、まあそ
character from the Astro Boy comic, but I think Astro Boy like outwits him in that comic, like sort of sends him flying off into space rather than fighting hand to hand. But you do fight him hand to hand in the you fight him hand to hand in the game, which is kind of cool. One that stuck out to me, there's that big fight with Sharaku, where he's just constantly summoning all these cool creatures and stuff. That what I thought was interesting. I should also say, in the very first stage, you fight this giant spider robot, which is a pretty straightforward villain in the game. But in the 2003 anime, it's not the case. Actually, the first episode of the anime, from what I believe, wraps up with Astro Boy and the spider coming to terms and sort of finding resolution. So that is actually one area where they made the game more video gamey, you can say, rather than keeping in more of the story bits.
There's a question about.
何か質問があれば、本家スピードゲーミングさんのところで今回ね、本家発信をやってますので、英語になりますが、もしかしたらデイビッケイドさんが、いや、ちゃんと英語で書いた方がいいですね。これはコミュニティのもの。向こうが日本語でもいいよって言ったら、英語で書いてみるかもしれないです。
And it's a film rather than a TV series as well, which is also a difference. It was made by a studio I think was called Imagi. It didn't do very well. I think the studio, I believe, like either kind of folded or something else happened to it. But I think 2003
今、新しい
was definitely not the last
なん
Astro
か
Boy
作
production,
品
but
に
I would
つ
say
い
it
て
was
の
probably
話
like
を
the last
され
successful one.
てい
There
て、
have been
ただ、
a couple
うま
new
くいかな
productions
か
that
っ
have
た
been
っていう
teased
の
over
か
the
な。
past couple of years. There was one that, if anyone's familiar with
2009
animated series
年
Miraculous Ladybug,
ですね。2009年のアトムの映画ですね。の話をされてい
I don't think
ます
has
ね。
gone
はい。
anywhere. We haven't heard anything about it since. So
こ
definitely like
の際にも
2009
し、
Astro Boy film is one I would say. I think there was a series of
この
shorts
作
as
品
well
を
over
ご覧になられ
here
た
in
方
another
が
country
いれば
that
っていう
there are some fans of,
ところで
but
す
those
が、
are the ones I'd
サ
be
イトが
familiar with.
あった。
Aside
そ
from
う
the
ですね。
various reboots, of course. I mean, I should
ありま
say
す。
that there's a, I don't
日
remember the
本
title,
で
there's a
も
manga series based on Astro
公
Boy.
開は
It got
2009
an
年
anime
10
adaptation a couple of
月
years ago.
公開
If
に
it's
さ
learned
れ
anything
て
by
いま
Tezuka,
すが、
this
ちょっ
was
と日本
again
の
like
サイトが
another
もうなくなっ
artist
てし
who
まっ
did
ている
kind
の
of the
で、
same story.
そう、
Like
海外の
sort of re-envisioning
を
the start of
見
Astro
れば
Boy
と
and
いう
his
ところです
origin.
ね。はい。
The character looks totally different. It had a really incredible opening by the same guy who did the opening to the anime series Carol and Tuesday. I would say that is probably the most notable thing about it.
I have one more question. If you could recommend
一つ、
a
ディービケイドさんから
cameo
質問。
series, like for example, I know Jetter Mars is in the game,
Right.
and I remember being
ア
excited
ニメ
for
出現しているシリー
Ambassador
ズでおす
Ranma,
すめ
which is
は
one of
何
my
かあります か
Oh, absolutely. Ambassador Ranma is there. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any other like references that are like, okay, this is a deep cut, but you should watch the series? Because yeah, I haven't touched on a lot of those series, so
本当にそうですね。
there's one that you're like,
仮
okay,
面
outside of Astro
仮面
Boy, this is
出
a good
演している
spin-off, or
作
this is
品
a
でおす
good
すめのシリーズはないかって
this
い
is
う
a
か、
good series that you
読ん
should
だあまり
definitely
触れたことがないか
watch
ら、
to
なんか
get
お
the
すすめありますか
reference.
みたい
But
な
I
ことを
never
聞いて
watched,
る
for
と。
example, Jetter Mars or
手塚作品、本当に多岐にわたるので、
that's
どう
true.
なんでしょうね。私はもうピンポイントに好きな作品しか読んでないから、この今お話しされてる方は、ブラックジャック読んでないって方だったら読んだ方がいいよ。絶対読んだ方がいい。
series that has everything Tezuka does in one package,
大人つってるか
it's
な。
pretty good at that, and a lot of the stories stand alone, so that's pretty cool. I think honestly, for a lot of folks, they might know who Astro Boy is. They might just not know who Blackjack is. So
めちゃく
while
ちゃブラック
Blackjack
ジャッ
is
ク推しですよ。
definitely in no way
私も
obscure
激
to
推
the
し。
average Tezuka
あ
fan, I think
と、
for regular
今の単
folks,
行本だ
Blackjack
と
might not
確
be
か
super
載せられない
familiar
作
with.
品とかも
I'll
あっ
also
て、
say there's a very good
載
animated
ってないやつ
TV
が私
version
あ
of
ったような気が
Blackjack
し
that
ますわ。
Osamu
は
Dezaki
い。
directed.
なんだ
Like
ろ
it's
う
sort of in
な。
Dezaki's style. It's like
あ
very
あ、
melodramatic. There's beautiful visuals. There's the character designer. I believe it's Akio Sugino who works on the series
な
as
ん
well.
か、まあせっかくなので
There's
皆
a
さ
couple
ん、
different
チャッ
Blackjack
トで
adaptations, but that is the one I recommend
お
checking
す
out.
す
It
め
used to
の
be
手
available on
塚
Retro
作品
Crush.
あれば、
If that's still around, if you're
は
like
い。
happen to
後できっ
be
と
in
DB
an
ケイドさん
area
が。
where that's available, I recommend checking it out there.
そうです
That's
ね。
just
本当に、一番最初の多分、 先ほど私がちらっと
I
言った
will
秋田
back
県
that
版でしたっけ
recommendation.
一番最初。
Yeah, I will also say, since he brought up
じゃないと載っ
recommendations,
てない
if you listen to this
やつ
presentation
が、
and you want to learn more about treasure in particular,
あ
there
っ
are
た
two
り
different
す
things I
るので、
recommend. There is a book called Legends of 16-Bit Game
あ
Development
と
by
私
John
が全
Harrison,
部を
which
ちゃんと読んでない
apparently
け
is
ど、
the
三
single
つ目
best
が
source
通る
for
とかも
information
ちら
on
っと
treasure
読
in
んだか
English.
な。
Unfortunately, I did some digging and it looks like it's
もう
out of
本当に
print,
ちょっ
so
と
unless
部
they
分
like
部分でしか
reprint
読ん
it,
でない
that
から、ち
probably
ゃん
won't
と
be
通し
easily
で読んでな
available.
いんですけど。
But I'd also say there's a website called Shmuplations, which is
な
really
んでしょう
famous
ね。
for having
ああ、
tons
火
of
の鳥ね。
lots
火の
of
鳥は
Japanese
もう
or
超
world
有名ですね。
Japanese-only
火の鳥
interviews
も
of
実は
different
私、ち
developers.
ょっ
They have a
と、つ
ton
ま
of
み食
information
いみ
on
たいな言い
treasure
方してま
in
すね、
there.
こっちもね。
So I'd recommend going to that site and digging around if
も
you
う
want
名
to learn
作
more
だとい
about
う
past
話を、
treasure titles. I
理
checked,
解
I
してお
don't
りま
think
す。
they have anything about Astro Boy and Mega Factor, but they do have a bunch of info about like early 90s treasure titles and even some 2000s ones. So that's a good place to go to if you're looking for more info about that.
Thank you so much.
Mm.
Yeah, just I want to say out there that this, if you're watching this live and you missed some of it, this will be
ガラッと
available
手塚
on
治
the
虫先
Anime
生の作品っていうの
Speedruns
は見てるんですけど、多すぎ
YouTube.
ですね。
Feel free
多すぎ
to
て、
reach out
まあね、
to
連
Adam
載
Wescott. He has a
のものもあれば、連載じゃないや
you
つも、
wanna drop
じ
where
ゃ
people
ない
can
もの
find
もあ
you
ったり
at.
すると
Oh
思う
yeah.
ので、
I'm on Blue Sky at wendgo.bluesky.social. I have a
この
newsletter,
辺含めると全部す
anywire.ghost.io.
ごい数にな
I
る
have a
ところであり
podcast
ま
of
す
a
が、
friend unpacking the shelf where I talk about all kinds of things. And I write for a couple different sites. Like I think I have some pieces for Crunchyroll News going up relatively soon. I've been reviewing manga for Yadatachi.
もうなん
Did
か、
a
その、
piece
ご存命
for
の
Remedy about
際
free indie games that
の、
came
なんだ
out a
ろ
little while
う、
ago.
並行し
I try to
て
get
進
new
め
stuff
て
out
い
regularly.
る数がなん
Definitely
かとん
like
でもないみた
this
いな
game is one that's
話を聞い
I
た
think
こ
it's
と
really
はあ
interesting.
りま
So
す
it
ね。
was
ちょっ
a lot
と、
of
さ
fun
す
to
が
have a
に
chance to dig into it and talk about it.
世界
Especially
的に
Tezuka is also
ジャ
one
ス
that's
トな
very
世代
meaningful
で
to
はない
me.
の
I
で、そ
read
の連載時
Phoenix
の
when I
状
was a
況ま
kid,
では
and
把
the
握しきれ
Kasuga
ていない
Phoenix
ですけど
Fakes
も、
arc,
同時にどれぐ
where
らい書いてた
the
んでしょう
entire
ね。
world ends and the main character becomes God and just recreates the world. Like 12-year-old me was like, you can do that in a comic? You can. It was really mind blowing. Yeah. Although I will also suggest, even if you're here a big Tezuka fan, if you haven't read a lot of the other artists around Tezuka, folks like Ishinomori, who did Kamen Rider, or like there's a really cool series called Legend of Kamui, which has just gotten an English translation slowly coming out, I think through Drawn and Quarterly last year. Definitely check some of that stuff out
あ
too.
あ、あれ
I
か、あれ
think
か。フェニック
Tezuka's
ス。ああ、火
extremely
の鳥はもしかして
representative
海
of
外だ
English language
と、フェニッ
scholarship.
クス。
There are tons of other manga artists that he was directly
ああ、
competing
そういうこ
with.
と
And in fact, like Tezuka produced a lot of his best work because he was super jealous of other artists in the field and was trying to outdo them.
火の
So
鳥
definitely
の
read up on
宇
Tezuka if
宙
you haven't, but
編
then once
を
you've read
子供
Tezuka,
の
seek
頃
out other
に
artists
読
and
ん
see
で
what they
衝
do.
撃を受けた
Just
み
like
たい
with
な話をされてる
games,
のかな
I think it's always fun to kind of go looking around and find out about stuff you don't know much about, whether it's anime
じゃあ
games,
11
video
本。
games, whichever. So all kinds of cool stuff out there
11
if you go check
本
it
を
out.
同時にね、されるというの
Thank
は
you
ちょっ
very
と
much, Adam.
も
And this
う
has
意
been
味
a
がわ
great
からないですね。
discussion. I'd like to have you absolutely back again. When we were coming up with this discussion, there was so many good topics and so many
Oh, for sure.
name drops that happened. Even some of the games we talked about today probably deserve, probably absolutely deserve
Oh, for sure.
their own
In
panel.
any treasure game, I could say.
多分ね、
you
私
could
が
probably
その
make a
ち
whole
らっと
PowerPoint
読ん
review.
だ火
Yeah,
の鳥は
we
多
didn't
分
even
ね、
talk
黎明
about the
編じゃない
other,
かな。
like
は
every
い。
single Astro Boy game, or there's a blackjack game for the
Yeah.
3DS
本
that
当に最初
I
の
I
や
don't.
つだ
think the
と思いま
director
す。
of
はい。
the director of Astro Boy and Mega Factor worked on a blackjack game.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's another one that sometime might deserve a deep dive. But yeah,
なかなか
like
ね、
Adam said, if there's
多
something
岐に
here
わ
that
たる作
inspired
品だ
you,
と思います
whether
ね、やっ
it's
ぱりね。
reading about Tezuka, whether it's about researching one of the games or anime series, there's a lot here to digest.
まあ、火
And
の鳥に関し
definitely
て
join our
は、ね、
Discord
ファミコン
and
版の横
let
ス
us
クロー
know
ル、ちょっと
what you want
先日、昨
Adam
日
Wescott to talk about
の、
next. And I'm sure he'd be
MSX の
happy to
時
come
にちらっ
back.
と話を、
Yeah,
あの時
or
に
for
ね、
folks out there who you'd love to
MSX
see on
版
one
の方の、
development topic or another,
火
like
の
any
鳥紹介されてまし
speedrunner
た
for
が、
this
まあ、皆さんよ
community,
くご
like I'm
存知なのは、
sure
ファミ
there are
コン
folks
版
out there
で
who
す
are
ね。
experts in all kinds of things to go deep on anything.
あれが4
Shout outs to
編か。
Dracodon-san.
Yeah.
All right. Let's call it here, and we're gonna go ahead and prep for the next run by Cotton-san. That's Kid Station Anpanman 2
はい。ということで、これで、こちらの後のね、お話コーナーが終わりで、次、アンパンマンの方ですね、始まりますので、ちょっと準備を行ってまいります。少々お待ちください。失礼いたします。
You a soccer mom, I be kicking rounds in the octagon with no squares in my circle. Patience is a virtue, but I can't wait for us to burst through the game. You gon' know my name when it's done. From here to the land of the rising sun. Turn it up to the max. Say the name from the bottom of the map. No change, I'm the same old cat with an abstract brain. We're playing our tracks. Turn it to the max. The max. To the max. To the max. Yeah, to the max. The max. Everything to the max. To the maximum. Everything to the maximum. Well suited for the job, but ain't slacking none. No packing guns. Still aiming for the stars. Passion runs deep. I love making bars through a fish-eye lens. Astounded when they get the picture, because my vision's well rounded. Look in the clouds, that's where I'm found in. Painting blue skies, more flows than the fountain of youth. Young with an old soul, never bound to. These lies they supply only round truth. I ain't hearing that trash, every soundproof. Anything from their mouths capped like a crown tooth. Liabilities lie on their abilities. When Achilles is killing me, I rely on agility. Mobility from dreaming is real to me. If you're not a fan of nobility, you might not be feeling me. Ooh, bust a rhyme on my woo-ha. Then find peace of mind on my woo-side. Stay away from the demons and brouhahas. It's to the max anytime you introduce us. Wait, bust a rhyme on my woo-ha. Then find peace of mind on my woo-side. Stay away from the demons and brouhahas. To the max anytime you introduce us. Turn it up to the max. High volume. Say the name from the bottom of the map. No change, I'm the same old cat with an abstract brain. We're playing our tracks. Turn it to the max. The max. High volume. To the max. To the max. Yeah, to the max. The max. Everything's to the max. To the max. To the maximum. Everything to the maximum. Anything, everything to the maximum. It's to the max. Everything to the maximum. Anything, everything to the maximum. To the max. This a lost art. Tony Stark parts. Powers in the heart shine when it's all dark. Paul Blarts better roll back like the prices at a Walmart. Nicest with the message. Write my rhymes on the hallmark card. On guard. When this song starts, heads go nod. We go hard. Even though the flow's calm as a sonar. My current thoughts flow far and wide. Bunch of caricatures, hip-hop's like Twitter posts. Not enough characters with characters, so it's time for me to change that. Dope beats and rhymes, we can arrange that. Turn it up to the max. High volume. Say the name from the bottom of the map. No change, I'm the same old cat with an abstract brain. We're playing our tracks. Turn it to the max. The max. High volume. To the max. To the max. Yeah, to the max. The max. Everything to the max. To the max. To the maximum. Everything to the maximum. Anything, everything to the maximum. To the max. Everything to the maximum. High volume. Anything, everything to the maximum. To the max. Everything to the maximum. Anything, everything to the maximum. To the max. Everything to the maximum. Anything, everything to the maximum. To the max.
This should be played at high volume. High volume.